Sure. Okay, welcome back, everybody. Please be seated. Okay, cross-examination, Ms. Eakes.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Mr. Collins.
Good afternoon, Ms. Eakes.
Now, you testified this morning that if it was just you and Officer Burbank at the scene and someone said, "Shut the fuck up, man," that would have been you, is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
Could we, Corey, could you play 612, please? Now, Officer Collins, this is one of the Vivint clips, is that right?
Looks like it.
And you would agree that you are the only officers at the scene, you and Officer Burbank, is that right?
At this time, yes.
Okay, I'm gonna have it played, and I want you to listen to it, listen all the way to the end, where we can hear "Shut the fuck up, man," okay?
Okay.
Did you hear that, Officer Collins?
I did.
Okay, and did you hear Mr. Ellis say right before you responded, well, first of all, was that you who responded, "Shut the fuck up, man"?
Again, I don't remember saying that, but if it's only Officer Burbank and I there, then I would say that was me, yes.
And you can't recognize your own voice when you hear that now?
No, not from here.
All right, and you would agree that when you said that to Mr. Ellis, it was because he had said something to you, correct?
I mean, again, I don't remember saying it, but that would be the usual reason for a response, yes.
Yeah, you wouldn't tell him to shut the fuck up unless he had said something to you, correct?
Or just talking in general when he's not complying and putting his hand behind his back like we're asking him to do.
So it's your testimony that even if it was just his non-compliance as opposed to saying something, you would tell him to shut the fuck up?
It's my testimony that if anything that someone would say to us until they're complying and putting their hands behind their back would be irrelevant to me.
But it would be in response to him saying something, correct?
That I assume.
And did you hear Mr. Ellis say, "Breathe, sir," or "Please, sir," right before that?
I couldn't make that out.
It's your testimony that you didn't hear him say that? Well, why don't we play that part again?
I heard the first part very clearly.
We'll play just the very bottom part.
Okay.
Did you hear it there, or was it played
You
again?
play it one more time?
Did you hear that, "Breathe, sir"?
It's possible.
And you're saying that you didn't hear that at the time?
No, ma'am.
Now, you would agree that you were hands-on with Mr. Ellis at that point, correct?
Yes.
You were physically touching his body,
Yes.
as was Officer Burbank, correct?
I assume. I can't see from here, but I assume yes.
Well, based on what you know about the sequence of things, Officer Burbank was with you the entire time, correct?
Well, yes, but as you know from the video, there's times when he's up pointing his taser in, and I'm the only one with hands-on Manuel Ellis.
Okay, well, but at this point, you would agree that Mr. Ellis was in handcuffs, wasn't he?
Well, where in the sequence? I don't know if he was in handcuffs at this point. I don't know that.
Okay, well, did you hear Mr. Hayes ask if you needed any help?
Yes.
All right, so let's play that part again. And who was that who responded that said, we've got some backup coming?
That sounds like I think it was Burbank who talked to him.
All right, and do you recall Officer Burbank saying that?
No, not independently.
You actually did recall when you were speaking to the Pierce County investigators in March 9th, 2020, don't you? Didn't you?
I recalled Mr. Hayes asking us if we needed him to help us.
All right, and in fact, you remembered in some detail a description of Mr. Hayes,
Yes.
and you recalled him asking you if you needed any help, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And you indicated that you had told them that the police were coming, correct?
I don't know if I said that, but I know that was said, that the police were coming.
May I approach Your Honor with Exhibit 59A? I'm handing you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 59A. Recognize that as the transcript of the interview that you gave to the Pierce County Sheriff's Office on March 9th, 2020?
I do.
So that was 6 days after this incident, is that right?
That sounds correct.
All right, and if you want to take a look at page 19.
Okay.
And you were asked about whether or not you recalled any other civilians around, correct? Other than the lady that turned. Do you remember being asked that?
Yes.
And you said there was one of the homeowners, I kept hearing them say, are you guys okay? Do you need help? Do you need me to call 911? Do you recall saying that?
Yes.
And you also gave a description of him, did you not?
I did.
And you said that he was a big Caucasian male, bald head, and he just kind of came out and was like, are you guys all right? What's going on? Do you
Yep.
recall that?
Yes, I do.
All right. So, in fact, you did hear Mr. Hayes, that we just heard on 612, ask about whether or not you needed any help, correct?
And I replied I did, but what you asked me was, did I tell him the police are coming? And I said I didn't know if I said that or Burbank.
Okay. If you want to take a look at your statement, does it say anything about whether or not you told him?
Is it on 19 as well?
Yes.
I said, but once we finally had him in cuffs, we said, we're okay, police are coming. So we were finally able to address him. I mean, we didn't both address him, so I'm not sure. I don't know if it matters which one of us said that to him, but I'm not sure that I said it.
Okay, so Mr. Ellis was in cuffs at this point when he said, I can't breathe, and you said, shut the fuck up, right?
No, that's not at all.
Sustain the objection.
All right, well, let's go back and listen to it.
Move to strike and cease comment.
Chair will disregard.
Let's go back and listen to 612, please. Mr. Ellis, at that point, then, Mr. Hayes had asked, do you guys need some help? And you think Officer Burbank responded that you had, that you already had somebody coming, correct?
Your Honor, this has been asked and answered. This is the third time.
Overruled. You may answer.
Can you repeat that, Ms. Heeks? I'm sorry.
Sure. At the point that Mr. Hayes asked if you needed help, Mr. Ellis was already in handcuffs, correct?
I don't know that.
Did you just look at your statement where you said at page 19, lines 20 and 21, but when we finally had him in cuffs, we said, hey, we're okay, there's police coming. Isn't that what you said?
Yes.
And so you said we were finally able to address him when it was over, correct?
But you're asking about specifically the statement that was made and whether he was in cuffs, and I'm not sure. I don't have a recollection of whether he was or was not, and it doesn't say that here.
Okay. Well, after Mr. Hayes asked whether or not you had, you needed assistance, it was actually when Mr. Ellis, it was after that that you said, shut the fuck up, correct?
If that's what,
I'm gonna object, that's not what he said.
We can listen to it, and I can actually have you take a look at Exhibit 18A as well.
Well, I'll let the question stand. You may answer.
Is that right?
repeat your question, please.
Sure. Mr. Hayes asked you, you guys need some help.
Yep.
And you responded, or Officer Burbank responded, oh, we got somebody coming, correct?
Yes.
And it was after that that you said, shut the fuck up, man, correct?
Yes.
All right, so you did hear Mr. Hayes, but you're saying you didn't hear Mr. Ellis say, I can't breathe, right before you said, shut the fuck up, man. Is that
Well,
your testimony?
At that point, I was holding on to his legs and he was trying to kick me off. So that was where my focus was. But I was looking to the side as I was holding his legs, so that's how I noticed Mr. Hayes approach us. But as far as the sequence of when he asked me that, when somebody answered him, I don't know that I could draw that from my statement or what you're saying here.
All right, well, let me show you what's been marked as, may I approach your honor?
Sure.
As 18A. And you've seen this transcript, haven't you, Mr. Collins?
I believe so. This is from your audio expert.
This is the transcript of distinct audio, correct?
It looks like it, yes, ma'am.
All right, why don't you take a look at page 4, the top of page 4. Actually, let me start at the bottom of page 3. You see at 23, 23, 28, Mr. Ellis says, can't breathe, sir, can't breathe. The first time that we just heard it on 6/12. You see that?
23, 23.
28.
Okay, I see that.
Is it your testimony that you didn't hear Mr. Ellis, what we can hear on that audio? That he said he can't breathe, sir?
Yes, I never heard him say that.
I object, this has been asked and answered.
Overruled.
I never heard him say that, ma'am.
All right, and then you see that at the top of page 4, at the bottom of page 3, it just shows a tone, correct, and something unintelligible.
Mm-hmm.
Yes?
Yes, ma'am.
And then at the top of page 4, you see it has Shad Hayes at 23, 23, 37, saying you guys need some help, correct?
I'm sorry, one more time where that one is? Where
Very
Shad?
Top line on page 4.
Page 4? Yes, okay.
Mr. Hayes says
You guys need some help.
23, 23, 37, you guys need some help, correct?
Yes.
And at 23, 23, 39, Officer Burbank apparently replies, oh, we got somebody coming,
Okay.
correct?
Yes.
And it's after that that you then make the comment of shut the fuck up. Is that right?
According to this, yes.
Now, but it's your testimony, you never heard any of those statements by Mr. Ellis.
Correct.
He said he couldn't breathe.
Correct.
Is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, now after Mr. Ellis said that the first 2 times is when you then asked him hobbles, is that correct?
Yes.
And by that time, officers Rankin and Burbank were there, or excuse me, Rankin and Ford were there, is that right?
I would need to see that timeline, but I think they were, if I remember correctly.
All right, if you want to take a look again at Exhibit 18A on page 4, just a few lines down. Do you see TPD 88, which is Officer Rankin? At
Yes.
23, 24, 22.
Right.
And he says, show me with 307, correct?
Yes.
All right, and so he would have been present, correct?
Well, that's when he arrived. He said he arrived, yeah. So within seconds, I asked for hobbles. So whether or not he was right there, I'm not 100% sure, because I was, again, looking down at the street at that point.
All right, and you would say that according to this transcript at 23, 24, 33, you asked for hobbles, correct?
Correct.
And that would have been 11 seconds after Officer Rankin said that he was arriving, correct?
Correct.
All right. Play 614, please.
this 18?
No, this is 614.
614, and it has a time frame up in the upper right-hand corner. And I asked that it's not zoomed. They can zoom in, but let's see the actual time frame of when they're arriving on scene. Can we
It
zoom
doesn't
out?
have a time on it on 614.
Well, mine's 614.
Well, what, is this zoomed in at all?
No, Your Honor.
Very low.
It's not zoomed in. Okay. And you recognize Exhibit 614 is when defendants Rankin and Mr. Ford arrived, correct?
It looks like it, yes, ma'am.
All right. And the play 614. And did you hear Mr. Ellis say that he couldn't breathe there?
No,
You didn't hear it at all?
no.
Okay, could we go back and play that, please? You hear that behind the siren?
It's unintelligible. I can hear yelling. I don't know who's doing what, though.
And Officer Collins, you still were in contact with Mr. Ellis at that point, correct?
Well, it's hard to say because as soon as he was hobbled, I was not in contact. I moved away from him, so.
Well, you heard Officer Ford say that Mr. Ellis said he couldn't breathe for the first time after the hobbles were applied, correct?
Correct, and I was not with him after the hobbles were applied.
So when Officer Ford said, when Mr. Ellis said he couldn't breathe, you were not. Is that your testimony?
Yes, that is correct. Well, at that instance, you just played me another instance where he said it, where I was there, but I did not hear it.
Well, there are no other officers who appear to be present at this time, correct, in 614?
On the video you just played me?
Yes, other than Officers Rankin and Ford?
Oh, no, there looks like there's a lot of officers there.
And why do you say there are a lot of officers there?
Well, if you watch the video again, you see Sergeant, because again, Sergeant Lim, he was there within seconds of Ford and Rankin, so he was right on top of them. And then Messinio and Sanders from County were there pretty much simultaneously, so everyone kind of was there.
Well, let's play 614 through.
Another car, I don't know who that is, and then Messinio and Sanders had come from south to north on Ainsworth. So there's multiple, I think it was 12 maybe there by that time.
Okay, and if you heard Mr. Ellis saying, I can't breathe, sir?
I hear him saying something, but I can't tell you what it is at that point.
Okay. Can we play that very end part again? You're saying you couldn't hear him say there, that I can't breathe?
I can't understand what that is saying, no ma'am.
Let's play it again. You didn't hear that?
I mean, now that you're saying it, I think I can hear it, but
And you're saying at the time, even though you were still present with Mr. Ellis, you couldn't hear it. Is that right?
I don't know that I was present at this point.
Okay, well, tell us, so you're saying at this point, when we can hear Mr. Ellis saying I can't breathe, that you had already stepped away?
I mean, and literally as soon as the hobbles were placed on, I was off, and Officer Burbank and I were walking back toward the car. And as you can hear, the street is flooded with sirens. The beeper's still going off in our radio headset. Sergeant Lim is talking to us. There's a lot going on. So from this zoomed out view from this camera, especially early on, I can hear what you're asking me to hear. But in there, I can't hear it. It sounds like he's saying something, but I can't tell you definitively what that is.
And so it's your testimony that you stepped away so quickly that you never heard Mr. Ellis on those other occasions say that he couldn't breathe. Is that right?
I never heard him say I can't breathe.
Never heard him.
No.
And so are you saying that at this point, that Sergeant Lim was there, he'd already been hobbled, and then you had walked away? Is that your testimony?
I was moving away, yes.
All right. Let's, was that all the way through 6:14? All right, let's play 6:59. You can hear Mr. Ellis saying he can't breathe there, can't you?
I can hear something, yeah.
Are you saying you can't hear it? He said, "I can't breathe"?
I can hear breathe in there for sure, so. See,
Let's
now, when
play
you're
it
saying,
again.
when you're asking me over and over again and listening to a courtroom over and over again, it's much different clarity than on the street, I can tell you that, but.
Let's listen to it again.
Remember, this is exhibit 59.
6:59.
This been admitted?
Yes. This is from the dispatch, Your Honor.
Is it a sub part of something that's been admitted already, or is this separate?
It was admitted separately.
Yeah, it's,
Yes, it is. And that was actually came over the dispatch. Do you recall hearing evidence about that?
In this courtroom, yes.
And you recall, you can hear on there, Sergeant Lim saying slow incoming. Did you hear that?
Is that what he says? Can you play it back?
Sure.
It could be slow incoming.
All right, and slow incoming means that basically the situation's at least under control in terms of new officers coming in, correct?
Yeah, it's, so other officers, when they're flying to the scene because they still have this mic clicks and beepers call that they're coming to. So he's saying, you guys don't need to come here in emergency response
Right, because it's under control, correct?
to the other officers.
He's telling the other officers it's under control, correct?
No, he's saying we don't need additional. Not necessarily that's under control, no.
Are you saying it wasn't under control at that point?
That was his call. Again, I was just trying to hang on for dear life to Manny's legs at this point, and then the hobbles get off, and I'm off, and Sergeant Lim made that call, so you'd have to ask him. But he thought there was no more officers needed.
Well, you wouldn't have walked away from Mr. Ellis if you thought he wasn't under control, would you?
Well, once the hobbles were placed on, I was replaced. There was other officers. There was no need for me to stay there at that point in my mind.
So you're saying that he wasn't under control, or he was under control when the hobbles were placed on him?
Well, I don't know that he was under control, but we had him restrained. Those are two different things.
So as soon as the hobbles are placed, you're saying that you stepped away, is that right?
That's correct.
Right. And again, you said you didn't hear that time when Mr. Ellis said that he couldn't breathe, correct?
I told you, man, I didn't hear one time that he said that, ma'am.
I'm sorry.
I didn't hear him say that one time, no.
You didn't hear him say that
I
one
did
time?
not.
And I take it then you never relayed to any of the other officers that Mr. Ellis had been saying that he couldn't breathe, correct?
No, because I didn't hear him say it.
So when you heard Officer Ford testify that he heard Mr. Ellis say he couldn't breathe when you and Officer Burbank were there, you didn't actually hear it though, correct?
No, I did not.
And it's your testimony that even though you can hear Shad Hayes, you somehow had auditory exclusion as to everything that Mr. Ellis said about not being able to breathe?
I believe I testified to seeing Mr. Hayes and then noticing him. So at that point, we finally had him in handcuffs, and now I'm just holding legs and I'm looking to the side, so I was able to see him approach us.
Well, you did tell the Pierce County investigators what he said, correct?
Can you point me back to the page and I'll read it for us?
Page 19.
Yeah, there was a homeowner. I kept hearing him say, "Are you guys okay? Do you need help? Do you need me to call 911?"
So you did hear him say that, correct?
According to this, yes.
Right. And you remember that, don't you now?
I remember seeing him, yes.
You recall hearing him say that?
Um,
Should ask and answer.
it's,
Rule the answer.
yeah, it's, the one thing is, it's hard when, I have my independent recollection, which is we told them everything we know when we gave this statement. But as you sit in the courtroom and you hear other people testify and you're listening to videos and you're hearing, you guys are playing the video over and over and over and over again, I'm trying to remember what I remembered at the time. So I'm answering you as honestly as I can in this.
At the time that you gave this statement, you would agree that the events were freshest in your mind?
Yes, ma'am, that is correct.
And you were attempting to provide all of the information that you had, is that right?
That's right.
And at that time, you clearly remembered Mr. Hayes saying, "Do you need any help?" Correct?
Yes.
But nowhere in this statement that you gave to Pierce County Sheriff's Office did you admit that Mr. Ellis had said that he couldn't breathe, correct?
Yeah, because I didn't hear him.
So, wasn't there, but you did recall Mr. Hayes, correct?
Yes, because I was looking at him.
Now, you testified earlier today about your experience as a police officer, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And in addition to the time that you've been on the Tacoma Police Department, you also were in the military, correct?
That is correct.
And as a result of both being trained as an officer as well as in the military, you received a lot of training with respect to first aid, correct?
We did have a lot of battlefield-specific medical training in Ranger Battalion, yes.
Well, you were a combat trauma medical training, correct? You took that?
I did.
And in addition to that, you were actually certified as an EMT in 2013, correct?
That is correct.
So you understood from your EMT training and your combat training and the training you received through Tacoma Police Department and the CJTC, that when someone has a breathing issue, that's a serious issue, correct?
It can be, yes, ma'am.
And you say it can be. You need to at least find out whether it is, correct?
Absolutely.
And that's something that you have to look for whenever you're having contact with people, correct?
Well, I mean, it's not something I'm just going to randomly ask every person, but if I'm aware of something and it's something that I can address, if they're not fighting me, if they're not resisting arrest, and it's something I can address, 100%, I'm going to try.
Even if they're fighting you and resisting arrest, you still have to take care to make sure that their medical needs are met, correct?
Well, yes, but if I know it at the time, I mean, if you're in a fight for your life, your priority is getting handcuffs on a person and protecting yourself. You're not really concerned about the things they're saying, because I've had people call timeout before in the middle of a fight. I've had people say, I'm not resisting, while they punch me. I mean, the amount of stuff you hear, you kind of get used to just focusing on what you need to do first, and then we can talk to them and address their medical needs or whatever else they need from us.
But after they're secure, you have to address their medical needs, correct?
Absolutely.
All right. And you would agree that you do have a caretaking function to people that are in your custody, is that right?
Every officer has a caretaking function. Yes, ma'am.
And your training also included lessons on emergencies, like breathing problems, correct?
I don't recall any specific training on that.
And you did receive training at Tacoma Police as well as at the CJTC, correct?
Training? Just in
Yes.
general training?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yes, ma'am.
You receive a lot of training as police officers, correct?
Not so much when you become an officer, because unfortunately the time needed on the street, it's hard to pull officers away. So we get as much as we can, but it's not extensive.
Well, you agree that you had at least 1,500 hours of training between the CJTC and the time that you were with Tacoma Police, correct?
I'm assuming you got that from records, so I'm going to trust you on that, but I don't know the hours.
We'll take a look at Exhibit 64. Meeting with the marked as Exhibit 64. You recognize that as your training materials, your training summary roster?
I've never seen this before.
Okay. Do you doubt that it's for you?
Well, that's my name right there.
It says employee Matthew J. Collins,
It does?
and it's dated June 8th, 2020, correct?
Correct?
And it shows that you had a total of 1,534 hours of training, is that right?
Yes.
Does it sound about consistent with your memory of the training?
Oh, I would have no idea. It was close to 1,534, ma'am.
You do understand that the basic law enforcement training is 720 hours, correct?
Yes.
So the rest of this training that you received, the 1,500 hours, would have been while you were a Tacoma police officer, right?
Yes, I assume. And then maybe courses they send me to also. I don't know if they include that.
Right. You received training in first aid, correct?
As much as we would do, as far as I recollect with first aid, would be, you know, like if you did a taser class, and then we would talk about aid measures you would take after administering the taser to somebody, or in like a firearms class, we would talk about applying a tourniquet, stopping severe hemorrhaging, things like of that nature. But I don't recall actual like a what I would consider a classic first aid class.
Well, why don't you take a look at page 2 of that document, under general law enforcement. You see it says first aid and CPR, 23.5 hours of training.
We did do a CPR certification class. That is correct.
So you did receive at least 23.5 hours of first aid training, correct?
I think every officer has to be CPR certified. Yes.
And you also received 16 hours of CIT training, correct?
What page are you looking at, ma'am?
We're going to take a look at page 4.
You said CIT.
16 hours of CIT.
That's what.
Crisis intervention team.
Objective foundation at this point.
He said he's never seen it before, so it's authentication's in question.
Your Honor, we can certainly tie it up later. We received it from the Tacoma Police Department.
Speaking of which,
It's a printout related to this training. Your Honor. I can hand it up to the court if you like.
Sure, why don't you do that?
This is my copy, but I'll hand it.
Sure. As soon as we hand that back to Ms. Eakes. Objection sustained. New question.
Do you have a memory of how many hours you've received of various trainings, Officer Mr. Collins?
No, ma'am, I do not.
Would you agree that you were trained in a variety of topics, including de-escalation?
We talk about de-escalation. Yeah, we've seen videos on it. I don't know what specifically you mean. That's a broad subject.
Have you been trained on ground defense?
Ground defense, like defensive tactics. You're saying? Yes, ma'am. I trained.
You've been trained on mental health training,
Yes.
and you've been trained on use of force training, correct?
Oh, yes.
Now, you said you acknowledge that every officer has a duty to ensure the safety of the person who's in their custody, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And that's because the person can't take care of themselves, right?
Correct.
And you would agree that it's important to listen to somebody who's in your custody to what they're telling you about their medical situation?
Absolutely.
And you would agree that it's important to respond to what they say about what their medical, if they're having a medical issue?
Definitely. Once they stop attacking you, absolutely.
And and you would agree that it's your responsibility once you take somebody into your custody to attend to their health, right?
Yes.
And to summon any necessary medical aid.
Absolutely.
Care,
Yes,
correct?
ma'am.
And you never contacted fire that night, correct?
No, I did.
And you testified that Sergeant Lim contacted fire. Is that the reason why you didn't contact fire?
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you meant I contacted them in person when they arrived. Sergeant Lim did make the call over the radio. Yes, ma'am.
But you didn't contact them in advance of their arrival, correct?
No, he called within, I think it was, if we pull the exhibit back up, it was 12 seconds within, by the time Manny was finally restrained in hobbles and cuffs. And so there's no reason to call again once he's already called.
Okay, so it's your testimony that it was Sergeant Lim who called for fire, is that right?
That's what I believe from the records.
And you believe, would you have an independent memory of that?
I didn't know if it was Burbank or Sergeant Lim or who, but I knew that they were called.
Do Because you did initially say that it might have been Burbank who called for fire, or you did,
It,
correct?
it could have been, yeah.
But you never, in terms of fire being called, you would agree actually it was dispatch who asked whether or not fire needed to be called, correct?
Oh, I don't know that at all, ma'am. I don't think that's the case.
Why don't you take a look at Exhibit 18A and take a look at page 5.
Judge, I'm gonna ask for the instruction that the company is speaking for election purposes.
I haven't got this objection, but you're asking him about his personal knowledge of that night, that's why he's on the stand. But now you're asking him to say what's in some other report that he had nothing to do with making.
Your Honor, I'm
I
asking
don't think
about-
that bears on his personal knowledge.
Well, it bears on his testimony that it was only 12 seconds and that it was Sergeant Lim who called for fire. So I'm permitted to impeach him or ask him about who actually called for fire.
Well, you're talking about dispatch asking for it.
Correct.
My understanding is dispatch asked Lim for it, and Lim said yes. I don't know whether you say they asked for it or Lim asked for it, it amounts to the same thing, right?
So I'm asking, well, that's what I'm asking about. I'm asking about that.
You're asking about who said it first, dispatch or Sergeant Lim? Or maybe it was Officer Burbank, because he wasn't sure who said it. It doesn't go to his personal knowledge, he wasn't on the call.
So you don't have, do you have a memory as to who actually called for fire?
Not from the night of the event, no, ma'am.
Now, you were trained on excited delirium that you treated as a medical emergency, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And prior to fire's arrival, you never told fire that Mr. Ellis, you thought Mr. Ellis had excited delirium, did you?
Prior to their arrival?
Correct.
No, when they arrived, I told them.
Right. You didn't contact him in advance and let them know that that you thought he had excited delirium, did you?
I did not contact them, no.
And in fact, you didn't tell anybody else at the scene that you thought that he had excited delirium, did you?
I don't recall if I did or not.
You
I thought
certainly
I,
didn't say anything about it in your statement, did you?
I don't know. If you let me look at it, I'll check, but I'm not sure if I said that to someone on the scene or not.
Do you have a memory of telling anybody at the scene that you thought Mr. Ellis had excited delirium?
Not independent recollection, no, I don't.
And you would agree that it would be important for fire to know, wouldn't you, that Mr. Ellis, you thought that Mr. Ellis had excited delirium, correct?
Yeah, that's why I told them, yes, ma'am.
And it might affect the pace at which they responded to the call, would you agree?
I don't know, because I don't know what fire had on their plate that night.
Can you think of any reason why you wouldn't want to tell fire before they actually come out at the start, that you think this is somebody who has excited delirium?
Well, I think also you kind of have to look at the situation, man, where this is not something that it's like right away we understand it's excited delirium. I mean, this is, I have my initial interaction with Manny at the window when he runs up from the car. I have the things that I'm witnessing there. Then I have the strength that I'm seeing when he picks me up off my feet and throws me. Then we have like kind of his interaction, how he's acting throughout the whole arrest. So he finally it's not like I just know right away and I'm explaining this. I'm putting this together, and by the time I'm walking behind the patrol car, waiting for fire to show up, it's starting to click what we dealt with. But I can't just I wish I just had a brain where I just knew that instant, but unfortunately that's not how it works with me.
But it's your testimony that you did know, or you did believe he had excited delirium before fire arrived, correct?
Yes.
And you're saying even as you walked to the back of the car, you knew at that point that he had excited delirium?
I don't know at what point it became clear to me, but at some point it did.
Okay. And you didn't try to alert fire before their actual arrival at the scene, correct?
No, I did not.
Now, you would agree that you were also trained at the police academy and at Tacoma about the prone positioning, correct?
Yes.
And you're taught that the prone position is a transitory position?
I don't think I've ever heard that terminology.
You've never been taught that it's a transitory position?
No.
Well, you've been taught that you shouldn't leave someone in the prone position once they're restrained, haven't you?
I don't think I've been taught that, but that's pretty common sense. I mean, we don't leave people in the prone that we don't have to. I mean, usually someone's cuffed and you sit them either in your car or on their bottom on the sidewalk. I mean, it's kind of just like a common sense thing.
Okay, and it's common sense because you know that it can lead to restricting their breathing, correct?
And it's just uncomfortable, and it's just unnatural to leave someone face down. I mean, it's just not something that we do.
And you would agree that you understood from your training that it can make someone panic to be left on their stomach also, right?
No, I didn't learn that from my training.
Were you trained that you shouldn't put weight on someone who's restrained and prone on the ground?
No,
You never received that training?
no.
So the training that Mr. Nielsen talked about and that Jack Ryan talked about, you never received?
Mr. Nielsen never said that we received training to never put weight on someone's back once they were restrained. I don't think. That's not what I recall him saying.
You
But
don't recall him saying that?
I don't recall him saying that, no.
And when Jack Ryan testified, you disagreed that you were taught that you shouldn't put weight on someone who's restrained in the prone position?
I'm going to object to comment on the credibility of the witness.
Sustained.
Were you never taught that?
I was never taught that, no.
You were aware that there's a danger of positional asphyxiation resulting in somebody's death, correct?
Yes.
And in fact, you even understood that Tacoma police had a policy that you couldn't transport somebody when they were in a hog-tied position, correct?
I'm not sure if I knew that was a policy, but it makes complete sense.
And you're aware that there are dangers associated with having someone in a hog-tied position, correct?
In a hobble, we never do hog ties, but if you're talking about use of the hobbles, I think with everything, there is a danger. I mean, you put a person in handcuffs and they can dislocate their shoulder. There's
When I
always a
talk about
danger.
The hobble, I'm talking about having the hobble connected to somebody's handcuffs.
That's the only way I understood that a hobble was used.
So it's your testimony that you've never used a hobble without connecting it to somebody's handcuffs?
I've only seen it one other time, and it was connected.
And as part of your training as a police officer, you're trained to deal with people in crisis
Yes, ma'am.
and people with mental illnesses,
Oh, yes.
and it sounds like people on drugs.
Oh, yes.
And it's your testimony that you frequently encounter people on drugs, is that right?
Unfortunately, yes, ma'am.
Now, you understood also as part of your training about the use of force standards, correct?
Oh, yes.
And at the time of this incident, you were trained that you can only use force when it's necessary to achieve a lawful purpose, correct?
Yeah, I think that's always the standard, yes, ma'am.
And you knew that you could only use reasonable force,
Yes.
and that if someone someone's under law enforcement control, unreasonable uses of force should cease, correct?
Yes.
And as a TPD officer, you were never trained in the LVNR, were you?
Not specifically at TPD, no.
And in fact, when you went to the Basic Law Enforcement Academy, you weren't permitted to be trained in the LVNR, correct?
Well, it's not so much that, it's that, again, LVNR is a company, so they sent like a contractor to the academy, and your department, from how I understood it, could pay for you to go to this class. But Tacoma did not pay for people to go to that class, if that's what you're asking me.
So Tacoma did not allow you to be trained on the LVNR when you were at the academy, correct?
They didn't allow us to go to that class. They didn't pay for us to go to that class.
And in fact, the TPD policies don't actually refer to the LVNR at all, do they? The use of force policies?
No, but it opens up to training outside of the department that you can use if you find it reasonable and necessary.
And my question is, the TPD policies don't actually have any reference to an LVNR, do they?
No, we were writing it at the time, actually, of this incident for TPD, but I don't think it was the word or the term LVNR was in the policy itself at the time.
And is it your testimony that you were part of writing the policies on the LVNR?
I wasn't part of it, but I was part of the cadre. I was part of the defensive tactics cadre, so I knew that was something that we were going to work on.
But the TPD policies didn't mention LVNR at the time of this incident, correct?
I don't think they mentioned it, no.
Now, you're aware of what proactive policing is, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And in fact, TPD encourages proactive policing.
That's correct.
And proactive policing means that you don't just respond to calls, but that you actually go out and try to make contacts with people to determine whether or not there's any criminal activity, correct?
Not necessarily contacts with people. It's kind of like how I was describing to Mr. Osser. When we go down to Hosmer Street, you look and you see, like, unfortunately, there's so much crime on that street, you may just see someone start getting assaulted or someone trying to grab someone's purse. And by us not sitting at the station and waiting, but being there on the street and being proactively looking for a crime, that's kind of more what that's addressing. But as far as, we didn't really go around just making social contacts with people.
You would arrest people or stop people for things like bicycle helmet violations, correct?
Yes,
And that'd be a form of proactive policing.
it was, yes ma'am.
And then you would use that contact to run someone's name for warrants, for example, correct?
That did happen.
And you could stop people that you saw on the street and chat with them and get their name, correct?
Well, if there was a reason, if there was a legal reason to stop, you have to have a legal reason to stop somebody.
And other kinds of proactive policing include things like headlights being out, correct?
I mean, that's a traffic violation, but I would think that's more of a traffic violation, so you're not in accordance with the state's traffic laws at that point.
And Tacoma, actually, you received encouragement from Tacoma Police to engage in proactive policing, correct?
I don't know if it was ever explicitly stated, but that was definitely something that we always talked about, yeah.
Well, you were praised in some of your reviews for being a proactive officer, correct?
I'm not aware of that independently, but
You don't recall seeing that in any of your reviews?
it could have happened. I don't remember it's been 3 years since I've even been at the department, so I'm not sure about my reviews.
Now, I want to ask you about, you testified this morning about a prior police stop, a prior stop that you had prior to encountering Mr. Ellis. Do you recall that?
The traffic stop?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
And if I heard you correctly, you testified today that that stop involved two black women, is that right?
That's right.
And that one of them was crying,
Yes.
and that she said she had a warrant,
Yes.
and that she said, and you even added that you said they had a broken windshield, is that correct?
Yeah, they had like trash bag windows, like where your windows are broken, so you just put up trash bags and tape them over the windows.
So it wasn't the windshield that was broken, it was side windows?
I think the windshield was cracked, but there was side windows that had trash bags for the windows.
And you testified that you didn't run them for warrants, correct?
Yeah, I don't think we ran them. It would show up if we ran them on that CAD report. It would add them to the call.
And you didn't issue any tickets, correct?
We did not.
Now, when you gave your statement back in March 9th, 2020, you were asked about whether or not there was a prior stop, correct?
Correct.
And in fact, you said that you didn't remember the prior stop.
I said,
right?
yeah, that's right.
Okay. If you want to take a look at Exhibit 56 or 59A, page 16, starting at line 22.
Okay.
And read up through 17, page 17 at line 7. You would agree that you were asked specifically about whether or not there was a prior stop, and you indicated that you didn't remember it, correct?
Yeah, I mean, at the time you have to understand, this was such a traumatic, crazy incident that definitely at the time of this was all I could think about for well over a year.
So, again, back in March of 2020, March 9th, 2020, you told the officers you didn't remember anything about the call, correct?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that was pertinent for our interview. I think they just offhandedly asked me.
So you told them you didn't remember anything about a prior stop, correct?
Yeah.
Now, you were shown a CAD from that prior stop, correct?
Yes.
I'll show you what's been marked as Exhibit 13. This is the CAD related to that prior stop, correct?
Yes, I think I have it.
And you would agree that there's nothing on that CAD that indicates that these were two black women that you stopped, correct?
Yes.
And so is it your testimony that you never even ran them to find out what the warrants were?
Yes, that's right.
You never bothered to check? It could have been any kind of warrant, correct?
No, because I remember she had a legitimate story, and she told us exactly what was going on. She was driving her friend's car. She just needed to go to the store, and she had a real story, and we wanted to cut her a break.
And you didn't bother to, but you did run the plate, correct?
It looks like it, yes, ma'am.
And you ran the name of Robert Bogan, correct? B-O-G-A-N?
Well, that's who the DMV has as a registered owner. So when you run a vehicle, it will then attach whoever is the registered owner of the vehicle.
And so you ran and discovered that the car didn't actually belong to these two women either, correct?
Correct.
And so there's nothing, however, on this CAD that says anything at all about this being two black women, one of whom was crying and saying that they had warrants, correct?
Correct. That was from my independent recollection.
that you had sometime after this incident, correct? Or after March 9th?
Yeah, after I was, Mr. Osser showed me all the paperwork and I looked through it and I had time to not be in this interview talking about this incident. Yes, there's a lot more that I remembered.
What's the other materials that Mr. Osser showed you that related
Just-
to this incident?
This right here.
And
Well, you said something refreshed your memory. What'd you look at that refreshed your memory?
This right here, this CAD report.
All right, the CAD report that doesn't have any mention of the two black men.
No, but it talks about the vehicle, and then it just remembered the incident and kind of like got me back into that situation.
All right, I want to talk about the incident with Mr. Ellis.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you testified this morning that you were sitting at the intersection clearing this prior stop, correct?
Correct.
And you would agree you never said that to Pierce County back in 2020, did you?
It wasn't asked.
Well, they asked you about a prior stop, didn't they?
They didn't ask me about when he was clearing it.
You said you didn't remember anything about it, correct?
Well, he was typing on the computer. There's only one reason to do that. You're running the information. And I remember when we were looking at Manny, I look over and he's still typing, looking down, and I'm like, what is going on? So,
You would agree you didn't say any of that to Pierce County, to the sheriff's office, correct?
it wasn't pertinent at the time.
And they asked you questions about the entire incident and how it transpired, correct?
They never asked about when we were clearing a traffic stop. That was not relevant.
Did they ask you about how it was that you came to be in contact with Mr. Ellis?
Yes.
And you never said anything about you sitting at this light clearing a stop, correct?
I don't think I mentioned clearing a stop, but again, that wasn't relevant to, they were just talking about Manny at the time.
So you're saying you remembered it at the time, but you chose not to tell Pierce County about it?
It wasn't important. It wasn't,
you may answer.
yeah, the thing is, it's like, for instance, if I'm in a situation, you can look at any one of my reports. Say I'm in a situation where I'm struggling with someone in like a convenience store. Am I fighting in the chip aisle? Maybe. But did I write that in the report? No, because it's not pertinent to what's going on. So if you then ask me, were you fighting in a pile of chips? I would say, yeah, I was. Well, why didn't you write that in your report? Well, there's just certain things where that wasn't even an issue at the time. You have to remember, ma'am, when we were getting interviewed, I had no idea that this would be looked at as our wrongdoing. To us, this was a very clear-cut situation. Tragic, but it was clear-cut. And when we were explaining this, I didn't even think to go into that kind of detail to protect myself for some reason. Did not occur to me in the slightest.
Well, Mr. Collins, you knew at the time that you gave this statement that Mr. Ellis had died, correct?
Absolutely.
And you understood that this was a use of force investigation?
Yes.
And there was an investigation into his death, correct?
Yes.
And you didn't tell them anything about how you were sitting at the light clearing the prior stop, correct?
I did say we were sitting at the light, but they didn't ask about the stop for me to tell them.
Understood. You didn't tell them anything about purportedly clearing this prior stop at the light.
Again, because they didn't ask me. I don't understand.
Now, according to your statement, you saw Mr. Ellis for the first time when he was out already in the intersection, correct?
Correct.
So you didn't see him run out of nowhere into the intersection, correct?
I did not.
And you never saw him waving his hands to stop the car, correct?
No, I did not.
When you saw him, he was already in the intersection.
He was at the door of the vehicle. He was either at that front quarter panel or at the door by the time I saw him.
And you say that he was trying to open the passenger door, is that right?
That's what it appeared from my vantage point, yes.
And it was late at night?
It was, it was 11:20 or something, but that's a well-lit intersection.
It was late at night?
11:20, yes, ma'am.
And you thought it was a carjacking is what you told Pierce County, correct?
That's not what I said.
You thought it could be a carjacking, correct?
Do you want me to read the statement?
Yes. Do you want to take a look?
Can you tell me what page, please?
Yes. Page 7 to 8, starting at line 21 on page 7.
Line what now?
Page 7,
I know, what line did you say?
line 21. You said, so at this point, I didn't know what we were viewing. I didn't know if this was a domestic violence thing. Maybe this guy just got...
I'm gonna object. This has been proper impeachment. Have him refresh his memory like he asked.
Well, I haven't heard anything but a carjacking yet, but you were asking him, didn't you tell them there was a carjacking? And he says, I don't think so. Let's read the statement. So, it seems to me he's invited Ms. Eakes to read the statement.
And you said, maybe this guy got kicked out of a car, maybe he's trying to carjack it.
I don't know. Yep, it says right there. So I
You said
think
after that, I don't know, but you said it could be a carjacking, correct?
your question to me, ma'am, was you thought you were reviewing a carjacking. That's a much different. If I knew it was a carjacking, that's going to be a much different situation. But I was just trying to explain kind of the mental process I was going through and things I was checking off in my mind.
All right, and just going back to this issue of Officer Burbank purportedly clearing the call. In fact, you were asked about, to describe what happened, correct?
Yes.
And you described that you were traveling westbound on 96, correct?
Let me follow along with you. Where are you right now?
Well, are you asking, let me, hold on just a second. I mean, it isn't, and that's I guess my point is if you're gonna ask him what happened, ask him what happened. If he says something that's inconsistent with the statement, then fine, but this is not a quiz about what he told the officers a couple days later.
Understood, Your Honor. I asked him about whether or not, it's your testimony that you came to the light and Mr. Officer Burbank was clearing the prior call, correct?
Your Honor, there's been asked and answered multiple times.
Well, I think Ms. Hicks is trying to regain her bearings, but that's fine. I'll let her ask that question.
Is that right?
He was still typing on the computer. Yes, ma'am.
And when you were giving your statement on March 9th to the police, to the sheriff's office, you mentioned that, correct?
I think that's the same point we were going over. Yes, ma'am.
And in fact, you described it as, so once we came to the stoplight, I stopped facing westbound. I looked over and there was some sort of disturbance happening. There was a black male in the center of the intersection, correct?
We're just gonna read this thing again? I thought we already just went through this.
I just did.
No, you didn't. We'll take our afternoon recess this time, ladies and gentlemen. Please do not discuss the case. Thank you. We'll see what his answers are, and then maybe there's use to bring the statement back up again. But otherwise, we're just doing the same, we're just repeating the same stuff over and over again. So that strikes me as cumulative and not genuine cross-examination. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. Since it's a statement by a party opponent, I could see where the substance of it comes in. That's why it's already come in. So it's not really an impeachment issue, but we're just bouncing the same rubble twice.
Sorry, Judge, I use impeachment because she's trying to point out something different than police testimony.
Oh, I understand
I don't
that.
wanna have a
But, and if she's using it for impeachment, that'd be one thing, but she isn't using it for impeachment. She's using it to read it all over again.
Understood.
So,
I'm
so,
attempting to avoid speaking objections. My issue is when I object, Ms. Eads just keeps on going. She doesn't hear us.
well, that's the reason why I kind of stopped it. When I thought we made a ruling, thought it was understood, and then we went right back to it immediately. And so I thought maybe it'd be useful to have this moment to sort of see where everybody's at, and so to be sure that Ms. Eakes understands what the nature of the ruling is and why.
Your Honor, and can I ask, the court sustained the objection to the documents that we received from the Tacoma Police Department showing what his training is? I wasn't sure, I mean, obviously, we can have someone here from Tacoma to testify about what the training documents are, but I'm not certain why the court would sustain an objection to the document provided in discovery he's had, and it clearly relates to his time. We asked for it from Tacoma.
Well,
So-
it seems to me a couple of things were at least potentially a problem with that, not just since you asked me. One is, and I don't have it here. Oh, that's not, this one I want. This is what I want. All that does is you took a class. I mean, for instance, you were talking about a first aid class. He called it a CPR class. The document says first aid CPR. So you kind of were talking past each other because he didn't see it as a first aid class, he saw it as a CPR class. If you'd read the whole description, that might have been more understandable. But the problem is that if I talked to you about being a lawyer, you took an evidence class? Yeah, took an evidence class. Do you know everything that's in there? Everything? Probably not. So saying the title of a particular class doesn't tell me much about anything, so that,
Well, I had the documents that showed that they were talking about things like breathing problems, but the court cut me off because she wouldn't let me quiz him about, I mean, he knows what those things are, Your Honor, it goes directly to his credibility, okay? And
Well,
the
he
fact
said
that
he'd never
had
s-
significant training about these
he
things,
said he'd never seen that particular document before,
doesn't
and,
matter whether he saw that particular document.
well, you're saying he's familiar with it. How's he supposed to be
He's
familiar?
familiar with what his training was, Your Honor.
Right, well, you're gonna tell me that there's a, now you can show it to me. This is 5.5 pages. Bunch of stuff on a line. There's just one page. There's another page. There's the back side of it. And this tells me what was, it's just computer and technology classes.
I wasn't asking him about that, I asked
No,
him
I know,
about
but-
de-escalation, I asked him about.
Right, and you can ask him about
I
that.
asked him about the training that's relevant to this.
Did he deny taking de-escalation classes?
But I'm entitled to ask him about the number of hours, and the court sustained the objection with respect to the number of hours that are on there.
Right, this is a summary report. So it's not even the individual classes. We don't know, in the de-escalation training, I don't know what that consists of. As I say, a one-line deal. When you ask about CIT, I assume you're referring to Crisis Intervention Team. Is that what you're talking about?
Crisis intervention training.
Yeah, well, it says team. There's another, one underneath that is critical thinking.
So I guess to understand, the court's not saying that the document's not authentic, but you don't think that it's fair cross-examination because I can't.
Well,
You can't both put on him
it's-
what his training is, and I can't ask him about the document that shows that he has training.
You asked him about his training. Was there anything where he denied it? And he can tell you what the training is. I don't know how many hours in a particular, how many hours did you have in evidence class? Right? Plenty.
I'm not on trial, Your Honor.
No, but,
Sorry.
no, but,
And I-
no, no, but
I was
it's
told
some,
in 1989, so, I'm sorry, I don't remember how many hours.
there you go.
But
But it
I
was
think
it was a kind of course you took for an hour a day, 4 or 5 days a week for a semester, right? I don't know, it adds up, or for maybe even a year, I don't know. But my point is that just pointing at 2.25 hours on this thing doesn't tell me much of anything about a particular line. And it's not a point, it's not really something particularly in dispute, is it?
Well, I disagree, but again, this is.
Well, what's in
cross-examination,
dispute?
not the court
Well,
deciding.
what's in dispute is to do with what's relevant and what's cumulative, and what's a waste of time. And if he denied having any training like that at all, then maybe we'd be there. But at the moment, it seems like, does he have a responsibility to care for any of his suspects? Says yes. Isn't that,
That he knows that he's been trained not to put weight on the back of someone who's in a prone position.
does that statement say, does that document say anywhere on there that he was trained in that?
No, but I can call Russ Hicks to testify about that. I mean, that's what Russ Hicks will testify about, and that he was trained, they were trained that he was in, prone position was a transitory position.
Well, anyway, you've got my ruling.
Can I address one other issue?
Go ahead, Ms. Conrad.
So one of my concerns is 18A, as well as the transcripts have been admitted for illustrative purposes only. There's an instruction that accompanies those exhibits. I think we've gotten a little bit loose with use of illustrative exhibits as substantive evidence. I mean, the oral statement or the recording is what the substantive evidence is. That's what the instruction says. And I think the state's using not only 18A as substantive evidence, but as well the statements of the officer as substantive evidence.
I think what they're doing is fine, and it's practical. You want them to queue up the recording and play it back each time?
No, but I think at the very least, then there needs to be some instruction as to the illustrative nature of
They-
18A.
They've already received that instruction, so, all right. We're at recess. Okay, welcome back, everybody. Please be seated. Ms. Zeeks, continue when you're ready.
Thank you. Mr. Collins, you were talking about when you initially saw Mr. Ellis, he was in the intersection. correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And you thought it could be a domestic violence?
I didn't know what it could be, but
You told Pierce County Sheriff's Office that you thought it could be a domestic violence, correct?
again, same answer, ma'am. I think I listed a few things because I said I didn't. I said my first sense was I didn't know what I was viewing, and then I rambled off some things that I thought could have been applicable.
Okay. And the things you rambled off were carjacking, correct?
That was one of them.
Or domestic violence?
Yes.
correct? Or that he'd been put out of the car?
Correct.
And you would agree that you had no idea at that point whether or not Mr. Ellis was armed, correct?
I did not.
And in fact, he had on a bulky sweatshirt.
He did.
And you didn't radio in at that point that you were having contact with someone, did you?
No.
And you didn't turn on your emergency lights?
No, there was no reason to.
And you didn't get out of your car?
No, ma'am.
And you said there was no reason to. So even though you saw something that you thought could be a domestic violence or a carjacking, you didn't think there was any reason to turn on your emergency lights?
Your Honor, object to the form of the question, it takes completely out of context of what you're. There's no what else.
I don't know where this is going. He said the car drove away, so what did,
Another question.
so you didn't know what had happened? That's what he said. I'm not sure what was happening there.
Well, you knew that Mr. Ellis was still out in the middle of an intersection, correct?
After the car left, yes, ma'am.
Where there were cars, correct?
I mean, I assumed there wasn't a car at the time, but that's where the cars would go. That's why I called them out of the intersection.
There were other cars on 96th, correct?
Not at the time.
And there were other cars that could be turning on Ainsworth, correct?
That's definitely possible, yes, ma'am.
And did you realize that Mr. Ellis could be in danger of getting hit by a car?
Yes.
And you didn't turn on your emergency lights?
I'm not sure how that would stop him from getting hit by a car, ma'am.
So you didn't turn on the emergency lights because it wouldn't help him getting hit by a car?
No, so you have to be careful when you're an officer when you turn your emergency lights on. In a way, you seize people. So where we're at right now with Manny, he's in the street. There's this car turning. So we have a possible crime. So this is kind of where you're starting to get into it, what they call a Terry stop. But then once the car takes off, that's our potential victim. They're gone. They don't want our help. So they're gone. So now that crime is over. Now we have a Terry stop, which means we can talk to them and kind of investigate. There's something suspicious going on. Again, like I stated before to Mr. Oster, if he had ran off at that time, we would have said, have a nice night, because it wasn't enough. So if I was to turn my lights off, I'm essentially seizing that man, and that would be improper use of force.
Well, turning on your lights might also protect him from getting hit by a car in the intersection, correct?
I'm not sure how that would happen.
You don't think that turning on your lights would help him if another car were to come?
No, if you look at,
I'll sustain the objection.
Now, you're trained not to call a civilian over to your car, particularly if you're acting aggressively, right?
I don't think that's ever specific. I mean, that's common sense, but he wasn't aggressive at the time I called him over.
Well, you're trained to get out of your car before you make contact with civilians, aren't you?
No.
You're not trained on that?
I mean, every situation is different. There's no real hard absolutes because everything is kind of evolving and different in the streets, so you kind of deal with things on a case-by-case basis.
Are you generally trained that it's dangerous to sit in your car and have contact with unknown subjects?
I mean, I think that's probably a good practice. That's smart, yes.
And you're trained on that, correct?
I'm not sure I was ever trained on that was specifically trained, but I think that's probably, like I said, best practice for police, yes.
But you could be a sitting duck in your car, correct?
You can be.
And you can't defend yourself from somebody if they walk up to your car door and they have a gun and you're sitting in the car, correct?
Correct.
And that's why officers get out of their car before they have contact with civilians, correct?
Again, it's situationally dependent, so you're using a very vague kind of open. I mean, sometimes officers get out of their cars, sometimes officers stay in their cars, sometimes, I mean, it's literally different every situation.
And sometimes you get out of your car when you're having contact with an unknown subject, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And it's your testimony that here, even though you didn't know Mr. Ellis, that you stayed in your car, is that right?
That's correct.
And you called him over to your window, correct?
Yes,
And you didn't know if he had a weapon,
I did not.
and you didn't recognize him,
I did not.
and you didn't, you'd never interacted with him before,
No, I did not.
You didn't know anything at all about his personal history, correct?
I knew nothing.
In fact, you had no idea if he lived in the neighborhood or if he was just passing through, right?
That's correct, ma'am.
And you didn't know whether or not he was on drugs?
Well, I had a strong suspicion once he got to my window, and I observed some things. That was definitely not what you normally observe someone like.
But before you called him over to your window, you had no idea if he was on drugs, correct?
No, I couldn't know that from that distance.
But it's your testimony that you rolled down your window and called him over, said, hey, come over here to my car,
That's correct.
correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And he responded, right?
He did.
And so obviously he followed your command, correct?
Yes,
And he came straight over to the window, is that right?
he did.
And it's your testimony that he said something to the effect of, I've got warrants, is that right?
That's right.
And you became aware that Mr. Ellis didn't actually have any warrants, correct?
It was my understanding he's pending a robbery to day in court, so I think maybe he thought that was happening, but I don't know if he had any active warrants. I think he did not.
My question is, he did not have any active warrants, correct?
I don't think it was active at the time.
And in terms of your comment about he's pending a robbery too, you learned about that in the course of this case, correct?
That is correct.
You didn't know that on that night.
I did not.
So it's your testimony that Mr. Ellis said, I have warrants, even though he didn't actually have a warrant, correct?
Yes, I guess that is correct.
And you said that he came up really close to the car, and it sounds like it was sufficient to concern you, correct?
It was definitely odd.
And you still didn't radio in,
No, ma'am. I still didn't know what we had at that point.
and you still didn't flip on your lights?
I actually don't remember when I turned the ambers on. It might have been right when I contacted him, but we kind of keep our hand on the controls for the car, and it's something that you just kind of start doing second nature. So I don't even recall turning the ambers on, but at some point I flipped the switch for ambers. So whether that was right when I called him or right when he came to the window, I'm not sure the exact moment.
But you didn't get out of the car, even though you were concerned about him coming up to the window so closely, correct?
That's correct.
And you said that at that point, you said to Mr. Ellis, go sit over on the curb, correct? Or something to that
Sidewalk.
effect?
The sidewalk, I think I said.
And Mr. Ellis never actually went all the way over to the sidewalk, did he?
No, ma'am.
And it's your testimony that instead he started walking around the car, correct?
Correct.
And I think you said on direct this morning that as he was at the hood of the car, you saw him fixating on your partner, Officer Burbank, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
But even at that point, you didn't call in, correct?
Correct.
And in fact, you could call radio and just say 96th and Ainsworth with unknown subject, correct?
Well, I mean, in hindsight, yeah, there's a million things I could have said, but like I was explaining to Mr. Osser, it's kind of the mental process, because I want to be very accurate, because again, I didn't know if I was witnessing a crime at first, then he comes to me, and I don't know if, is this a medical thing? Does he actually have warrants? So I'm processing that, and then he turns it into, okay, now he's fixated on my partner, and this is about to get violent. So I'm just trying to process this in my brain and call it out clearly, because I want my fellow squad mates to also know, do we need help, or are we good?
Well, you're trained that your radio is a lifeline, correct?
I think so.
And that's how dispatch or your fellow officers know where you are, correct?
Absolutely.
And that's why you radio in your locations, correct?
Yes.
And you didn't radio in 96th and Ainsworth, did you?
I did not, unfortunately.
Even though you then saw Mr. Ellis, what you said, fixating on your partner, correct?
Yes.
And you still didn't get out of the car at that point?
No, ma'am.
And you still didn't flip on your lights?
I never put the blue and reds on. The ambers were on for,
And
sorry.
you said that he then walked over to Officer Burbank, correct?
Correct?
And you saw Officer Burbank roll down his window,
Yes.
and you heard a conversation between Officer Burbank and Mr. Ellis, correct?
Yes.
And in your statement to Pierce County Sheriff's Office, you said that Mr. Ellis said something about threatening to punch Officer Burbank in the face, correct?
That is correct.
And even at that point, you didn't radio in, correct?
Well, pretty much the instant he said that, he started punching the window. So it all kind of happened like that.
Well, first Officer Burbank had to roll up his window, correct?
I think he started to roll up his window, but it was like, everything happened within milliseconds, we're talking.
In the statement that you gave to Pierce County Sheriff's Office, you said that Officer Burbank rolled up his window, and then Mr. Ellis started punching the window, correct?
Again, I think he started to roll up his window, and yes, I don't think it ever got all the way up.
How far down was the window?
I think it was like maybe, halfway.
And it's your testimony that even at the threat of a punch, you didn't get out of the car?
No. My testimony is, as soon as he started to punch the window, I immediately sprinted out of the side of the car and tried to approach him.
But you didn't call it in,
No,
is that right?
that's right.
All right, and you said that after, how many times did Mr. Ellis punch the car?
I'm not sure. As soon as the first strike happened, I was out of the car and running.
Do you know how hard he punched the window?
I mean, what do you mean, how hard?
Did you see how hard he punched the window?
Like I said, as soon as he hit the first one, it looked like a full punch to me, very hard. And as soon as the first one hit, I was out and running. I wasn't sitting there to watch him.
And you say that you got out of the car and you ran around to the passenger side, is that correct?
Correct.
To the front of the passenger side, is that right?
I didn't quite make it all the way to the passenger side, but I was headed that way, yes, ma'am.
Now, according to you, at that point, you say that Mr. Ellis turned around and basically picked you up and threw you, is that right?
That's correct.
And you never said anything in your statement, and you didn't see Officer Burbank door check Mr. Ellis?
I did not.
So you never saw Mr. Ellis get hit by Officer Burbank's door?
I did not.
And is it your testimony you never saw Mr. Ellis stumble forward or fall forward onto the ground?
He didn't fall forward on the ground at that point.
So in terms of what you saw, Mr. Ellis never had that interaction of being door checked with Officer Burbank, correct?
He might have been, but he wasn't on the ground, is what I'm saying.
But you didn't see it?
I didn't see the door check, no, ma'am.
You never said anything about it to Pierce County, correct?
No, I didn't see it.
Just say you didn't see it.
Did you say it to Pierce County Sheriff's Office?
I'll permit it.
I didn't see it, ma'am, no.
Okay. You didn't say it either, correct?
Because I did not see it, no.
And you say that Mr. Ellis picked you up all the way off the ground, is that right?
He kind of like a shove backwards, and I left my feet and went back on my back in the intersection.
And you said that you literally were off your feet, correct?
That is correct.
And you would agree that if someone was there watching, they would have seen that, correct?
Yes, I assume they would.
Would have been obvious to anybody who was watching?
If they were there, yes.
And you said in your statement that that was when you realized that Mr. Ellis had superhuman strength, is that right?
That would qualify, yes, ma'am.
And is that the term that you use, superhuman strength?
I think it was.
And that's a term that you learned in your excited delirium training, correct?
I mean, I probably learned that as a kid, but maybe it was in the excited delirium training.
Wasn't that one of the things that you're trained as a police officer, that someone might have excited delirium if they have superhuman strength?
I mean, it probably says extreme strength or, abnormal strength. I don't know the direct wording of what it says in the training.
But you've trained that someone, to say when someone has excited delirium, that they might have extreme strength or superhuman strength.
Yes,
correct?
ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Now, according to your statement, you said that, or your testimony, at that point, you said that you jumped onto Mr. Ellis, is that right, after you got back up?
So, I believe in my statement it's described as I described it as a melee because when I hit, I rolled backwards and I immediately charged forward again, and then it was just really violent, a lot going on up and down, and it wasn't very clear until the next clear point for me was when I mounted him and started to strike him, which is where I start picking up right where McDowell's video starts.
Right, and in your statement to Pierce County Sheriff's Office, you never said anything about after he threw you into the intersection that you rolled backwards, did you?
I'm not sure if it was asked, but
Did you say it?
was it asked?
Did you say it? You were describing the events.
Well, I would only answer the questions they asked me, ma'am, so, I mean, if it wasn't asked, then I probably didn't answer it.
Isn't most of your statement just a narrative from you? They didn't really ask you any questions?
They did, yeah, they just let me talk.
Right, and you didn't say anything about having rolled backwards, did you?
I mean, I definitely didn't just lay there.
And you didn't say anything about having charged forward at Mr. Ellis, did you?
No. Maybe I said close the distance, or I don't know what wording I used.
Now, you said that Ms. McDowell's video picked up when you were mounted on Mr. Ellis, is that right?
Well, it's actually when he's chasing Officer Burbank kind of toward the intersection, and they're fighting in the intersection a little bit.
All right, well, let's look at Exhibit 440, please. This is the video of Ms. McDowell's that you're talking about, correct?
It is, ma'am.
And this is the stabilized and magnified one, correct?
If you say so.
All right. All right, let's go ahead and play it. And when it first opens, you would agree that Officer Burbank is picking up Mr. Ellis and slamming him to the ground.
Oh, no, ma'am, I would not agree with that.
All right, well, let's go to Exhibit 439, please. This is the PDF. And you heard the testimony of Grant Fredericks about the PDFs, correct?
I heard a lot of things from him, yes, ma'am.
Oh, sorry, I meant 441.
And Ms. Eeks, if you're willing to provide me with Officer Burbank's testimony, I can walk you through this section of the video.
I'm just going to ask you some questions about this.
Okay.
I'm not asking you about Officer Burbank's testimony or his statement that he gave.
Okay.
All right, so taking a look at 440, and why don't we just kind of run through it if you
This
can.
is 441.
441, excuse me. 441, this is the PDF. And do you see Mr. Ellis's leg there going up?
I do.
And you see Officer Burbank's arm underneath his leg?
It looks like it, yes, ma'am.
Okay, keep going. And you see Mr. Ellis being slammed down to the ground?
Oh, no. I see Officer Burbank's arm going like this, and he's getting... That's why he flies back onto his back on the front side of the vehicle, which is what Miss Mulang described.
All right, let's go forward then.
And now he goes...
And you see Mr. Ellis on the ground, correct?
Yep, and he kicks Officer Burbank, and then Officer Burbank falls to his back in front of the patrol vehicle, and then that's the point I mount.
Okay, let's stop there. And you can see Mr. Officer Burbank's hand still standing up there, correct? You see his hand there with the little yellow arrow?
I'm not sure what that is, but I see the yellow arrow for sure.
Do you recall the testimony of Grant Fredericks tracking Officer Burbank's hands?
Yes, ma'am, I remember him.
All right, and he testified that that was Officer Burbank's hand. You would agree Officer Burbank was not on the ground?
Object before the question.
Well, you just, see, you were looking at the video, you shouldn't compare his testimony with another witness like that. But, you know, if you play that back, you can tell that's the hand. I don't think there's anything complicated about it.
Yes, ma'am.
But so then the question is,
You would agree
did Burbank fall on the ground? Is that the question?
You would agree in this part of the video that Officer Burbank is not on the ground, correct?
Well, you can't see his body, so I don't know. That's
Can
in
you
his
come forward?
testimony. See, he disappears. In his testimony, he said he went to the ground. So whether
I'm going to object that this is non-responsive.
No, it is responsive. I'm gonna allow
He's talking
that.
about Officer Burbank's statements is responsive?
She asked a question.
Yes, it is, under the circumstances of how you've asked him about this question.
Okay, that's fine. Why don't you go ahead and tell us what Officer Burbank said, because we can listen to his testimony.
again, so I,
Characterization of that question.
Counsel, confine your questions to questions,
Let me
and no
go back and
other
ask-
extraneous remarks,
I'll
please.
go back and ask you, can you play it back? You see Officer Burbank standing up, correct?
yes, ma'am.
And you see him taking Mr. Ellis to the ground, correct?
I'm not sure how. I mean,
Stop there.
I see this with my eyes, and I understand what you're describing, but that is not what's happening. He's just like his. The reason I said to look at his statement is because I don't know what he's seeing, but when I read his statement for the first time in court, he describes this perfectly in his statement. And what he says is they collide and they're twisting, and then he goes to the ground. And you can see in this video his arm go like this, and then all of a sudden, are you saying he just retreats back to the front of the car? He says he's kicked back, which is exactly what I see on this video.
Let's go forward. Do you see, well, let's stop right there. You would agree that Officer Burbank's leg is right here. He's standing up, correct?
Want that out again, please?
Yes, Officer Burbank's leg is right here and he's standing up, correct?
Yes.
And Mr. Ellis is lying on the ground, correct?
Correct.
On his back or on the back and side, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And why don't you go back a little bit and then go forward, Corey?
Get a pointer really quick.
Right.
Stop right there, please. Or actually go just a little bit forward.
Okay.
And you would agree that Officer Burbank, let me ask you the question.
Sorry.
Officer Burbank is still standing up, correct?
Yes.
And Mr. Ellis has a foot, his feet are off the ground, correct?
There's 1 foot on the ground, there's 1 foot that looks like it's controlled by Officer Burbank's arm.
And Officer Burbank's arm is underneath Mr. Ellis's leg, correct?
It would appear so.
And he's lifting him up in a takedown move, correct?
That's not, if you continue to play, like in a freeze frame, I guess you could get to that. But if you play the video and pause it for a second, you'll see his upper body twist as he's getting thrown that way. So if you want to do that, you can play it and pause
Would
it.
you play it forward?
Pause it. Okay, you see his hand moving this way, his whole body is going this way, and now he's getting thrown, and then you can see Mr. Ellis kick him and he disappears off the screen.
Let's go forward then.
Goes back.
You see that Mr. Ellis is on the ground, correct? You see
Yes.
that Officer Burbank is still standing up, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
All right? And we see Officer Burbank then move out of the scene, correct?
Well, he doesn't move out, he gets kicked out. See, here's the feet, and he extends his body. Is it your, I don't understand, are you saying he just ran to the front of the car?
I'm asking you questions,
I'm just not
Officer
understanding.
Collins. I know you want to argue about what's on the video, but I'm just asking you about it. Your Honor, I'm just asking him questions.
Now, he is trying to describe that Mr. Burbank lost his balance and was thrown in that direction. And every time he gets to that point, you stop it. Stop interrupting his testimony and let him describe this from beginning to the end. And then you can ask whatever questions you want, within reason, of course. And without a future commentary, I would hope.
Officer Collins, is Mr. Burbank standing up at that point?
Is that him there now? It looks like he's still standing.
He's still standing, correct?
As far as I can tell, yes, ma'am.
And as he goes out of this screen, he's still standing, correct?
I don't know.
Well, would you agree that you can't see anything on the video to suggest that Officer Burbank is lying on the ground?
That's true, I can see the car, ma'am.
And you can't see Officer Burbank, is that right?
That's right.
You can take your seat again. Now, this is the point at which you come in and mount Mr. Ellis, is that right?
Yes, ma'am, that's correct.
All right, and let's go back to Exhibit 440, please. If you can play it forward. You can just back up just a little bit there. And that's the part that you're talking about, where Mr. Ellis is, you're mounted on him and you're striking him, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And isn't it correct that you said that he was swinging wildly at you? Is that at that point, correct?
Yes, and kind of like reaching up at me.
Let's go, but he was swinging wildly. That's what you told Pierce County, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, let's go back to 441. You can do that, please. And if you could play it forward, please. Would you agree that there's nothing in this video that shows Mr. Ellis swinging wildly at you?
Well, it's very hard to see what's going on. All I can see is the white of my hand as my arm goes up to strike him.
Let's go back to 440 and let's, can you just play it slowly, Corey, please? Can't see Mr. Ellis swinging wildly at you, can you, in that video?
I mean, you can't see much of anything in that. No, ma'am.
You would agree that it doesn't show him swinging wildly at you, correct?
I would agree that it doesn't show much of anything, like I said, ma'am.
Now, you testified that Mr. Ellis, or you said to Pierce County that nothing was affecting Mr. Ellis, is that correct, in terms of the punches to him?
That, unfortunately, that is correct.
And you can hear him on this video, and I don't know, it might be a better one at 443, is that right? In terms of the sound that Mr. Ellis is making when you're striking him.
Yes, ma'am.
Play 443. First of all, you told Pierce County that after Mr. Ellis said that he was gonna punch Officer Burbank in the face, he never said anything else that you understood, right?
That's correct.
And in fact, you said that he only made animal noises and that he was growling, is that correct?
That is correct.
And let's listen at 546. I think it's video 440. It's magnified and stabilized. Do you agree that you could hear Mr. Ellis responding when you were striking him
In this, I can.
in that video?
In this video that you played.
And is that the animal noises that you were talking about that Mr. Ellis was making?
That's some of it, yes.
So those, why don't we play that then? And you can play it right. So Mr. Ellis crying out, that's what you call animal noises?
That sounds more like crying out in that video. So that must not have been what the moment I was talking about.
And you also say that Mr. Ellis was growling, is that right?
That is correct.
Now, during the interview that you had with the Pierce County Sheriff's Office, you never said anything about another civilian, Sarah McDowell, being at the scene, did you?
I didn't hear her, no ma'am.
So it's your testimony that you never heard Miss McDowell when she was screaming?
That's correct.
And you've heard it on the video? Maybe we can play Exhibit 20.
Hey! Stop! Oh my God! Stop hitting him! Hitting him! Just arrest him! Just arrest him! Oh my God! That looks so scary! Shut up! You have kids in the car, you dumbass! You already know. Shut the fuck up! Shut the fuck up!
Is it your testimony that you never heard Miss McDowell say any of those things?
That is correct.
And you never heard Mr. Lowry either?
No ma'am.
Now, in your statement to Pierce County, you described your reasoning with respect to why you thought you needed to use the LBNR on Mr. Ellis. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And isn't it true that you told the Pierce County that part of what you were concerned about is that you couldn't even see Officer Burbank at that time, and so you weren't sure if he was unconscious? Is that right?
That is true.
And you felt like applying the LBNR was your only option to get him under control. Is that right?
I felt it was the best option.
All right, let's take a look at Exhibit 440. I want to identify the point at which you say that you couldn't see Officer Burbank. So could you see Officer Burbank at this time in Exhibit 20?
Yeah, I think it's as soon as he gets kicked by Manny back in front of the car. From that point, I didn't know where he was until Manny started to stand up again, and I'm getting behind him. So in that period, so I didn't know what had happened there.
So in Exhibit 220, excuse me, in Exhibit 20 in Ms. McDowell's first video, you could see Officer Burbank, correct?
Yes. So from here.
All right, and let's take a look at Exhibit 438 then, Mr. Cowden's video. If you can stop it there. Now, this is the point at which you were using the LBNR on Mr. Ellis, correct?
I wasn't using the LBNR. I was starting to position myself to get into it. Yes, ma'am.
Well, you can see if you can just back up a little bit there. You're actually pulling him backwards in a hold with your arm around his neck, correct?
Yes, getting in position for the LBNR. Yes, ma'am.
And you would agree that Officer Burbank was right there in front of you at that point, correct?
I saw him once I had those taser lights in my eyes. Yes, ma'am.
So you did see him before you actually finished the LVNR, correct?
Just as I said on my statement, yes, ma'am.
Let's go ahead and play it forward in slow, please. So Officer Burbank was right there at that point, correct?
When I saw him, yes. It's like I said.
Once you were already in the position of the LVNR?
Once we started to fall on our sides and I saw the taser out, that's when I noticed Officer Burbank.
Now, is it your testimony that that Mr. Ellis did not lose consciousness as a result of the LVNR?
I think it was the LVNR never was placed on him, so that wouldn't work. But it was my feeling when I was waiting for the taser to take effect that the taser took appropriate effect, and that's why I then moved to cuffing from that position.
Let's go ahead and play that one forward again until we see Mr. Ellis drop his head down. And you see Mr. Ellis, you still have his arm around his neck, correct?
Can you play it back, ma'am? The point you're asking me. So I'm cradling his head right there. My arm is not around his neck. You can see I'm kind of in front of his face. You still have your arm around Mr. Ellis's neck, correct? Yes, ma'am. But as you can see, you see how he's facing us and I'm on top of him like this. I'm not getting the side of his neck that's facing me.
Can you play just a little bit further back before that, please? And you see at that point that Mr. Ellis drops down onto the ground, his head does, correct?
Yes, right when the taser application is finished, when the taser application kind of goes gray, that's right when I transition to cuffing, as I stated.
And you would agree that Mr. Ellis was not moving at that point, correct?
He was not.
And was he unconscious?
I'm not sure what he was. If he was exhausted, if the taser hurt and he was done, I don't know. But I wasn't waiting to figure it out.
He wasn't moving.
Not for that split second, no.
And long enough for you to be able to flip him over onto his stomach, correct?
Yes.
Now, you never told Pierce County Sheriff's Office that you put your knee on Mr. Ellis's head, did you?
I didn't put my knee on his head.
So it's your testimony that you never put your knee on his head or on his neck?
No, ma'am. Now when you play something and stop us still and he's fighting and I'm trying to maintain position on him, if my knee slips to his neck, that happens. But we need to understand from combatives is, if that's an amateur move, that is like what a big brother does to a little brother trying to hurt him. There's nothing effective about that. That is, if you do that, the person has the entire leverage of their body, and all they have to do is hit their knee off of your head and they're back in the fight. The only thing that makes sense is to pin the middle of their body or their hips, which is what I'm trying to accomplish the whole time. But everything's not easy when someone's fighting and kicking. And
So you don't think that the video shows that you have your knee on Mr. Ellis's head and on his neck?
I'm sure you could pause it at a point where it looks that way, but that's not what I'm doing.
And you're saying that you never put your knee on his head or his neck?
The same answer, ma'am.
Now, you also talked in your statement about the fact that Mr. Ellis was tased a second time, correct?
Yes.
And that was after you had already put him over onto his stomach, correct?
So with taser applications, what happens is once the probes are in, the only person who's really going to know is effectively the guy holding the taser, because they can re-administer the taser. So all I can kind of go by is feel. So after the first one took effect and I moved to cuffing, from that point I'm on that arm until he's cuffed. So I'm not sure when Officer Burbank hit his taser button or not, but if that's what you're asking me, the specifics I do not know.
Well, you did talk about him being hit with the second round from the taser, correct?
I know he was hit with at least 2 others.
Right, and so you did feel or saw that there was a second taser application to Mr. Ellis, correct?
I'm not sure if I said I felt it, but I know there was more. Like I said, I know there was more than one.
All right, why don't you take a look at Exhibit 59A, page 11. Again, this is the statement that you gave to the Pierce County Sheriff's Office.
What line are you looking at, Ms. Heeks?
Page 11, at line 11.
Yeah, it says, and I feel Shane give him another round from the taser.
All right, so you did feel that there was another round from the taser, taser,
Yep,
correct?
his body locks back up. We start to move eventually. Yes.
And you said that his body locked up and he started to move in, and you eventually got him into cuffs, correct?
That is correct.
All right, we can play 443 as the third taser application. Is it your testimony that you're not recall that there was a third taser application?
I mean, it's like, again, it's hard to say whether I got that from in this trial. Did I say it in here in the report? I don't know. But again, I'm focused only on cuffing. So whether Officer Burbank is administering taser rounds, I'm not sure, but you can tell that from his download here. 232254.
From the download from his taser.
Yeah, you can see it right here.
Okay, so you said that what you said in your statement to Pierce County was that you only accounted for 2 taser applications, correct?
That's possible, yes.
All right, and you're saying now that you don't know whether or not there was a third taser shot used on Mr. Ellis?
Is it in my statement? Are you referring to my statement right now?
I'm asking you what you recall.
I don't independently. Like I said, as soon as I got to that arm, my only job was to get him into handcuffs, which was all I was focused on.
And you were able to get him into handcuffs after the second taser application, correct?
I'm not sure if it was the second or the third or how many it took, but we eventually got him into handcuffs.
Now, you were not treated by the medics for any injuries that night, were you?
No, ma'am.
And you didn't, your suit that you were wearing didn't have any tears in it, correct?
It did not. I don't think
Or
so.
any damage to your uniform?
I don't think it did.
Now, you talked earlier about incidences where other people had gone for your weapon. You never claimed that Mr. Ellis had gone for your weapon, did you?
No, and he didn't at the time of the fight, no.
He never went for your weapon, did he?
Not that I know of, no,
And
ma'am.
he never threatened to kill you?
No, again, I didn't hear any verbal, intelligible words.
And he didn't threaten to assault you, is that right?
We didn't need to threaten it because he punched the window and then threw me. So he acted it out, so he didn't need to make the threat, I guess.
He never verbally threatened you, is that right?
Again, I had no intelligible words.
Now, is it your testimony that there were a series of kind of up and down movements with Mr. Ellis where you were up and then back down on the ground?
That is correct.
And the up parts, you would say, were not shown on the video, correct?
I think it's been established. There's a couple minutes not on video, yes, ma'am.
And any up times that you say happened are not on video, correct?
Well, I think Miss McDowell's video starts when I'm up, and then I go down onto the mount position, and then Cowden's video starts, and Manny and I are both up, and then we go down, so that would be 2 of the up and downs that I probably referenced.
Well, the video doesn't show, Miss McDowell's video doesn't show Mr. Ellis up when you're on him, does it?
It shows him up with Officer Burbank.
Now, you talked about, you remained at the scene, correct, until fire arrived and even after, is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
And you were, I think you said that after the hobbles were applied, you went back and stood at the front bumper of your car, is that right?
Yeah, so we kind of were like in the front. We went behind the car at one point, or at least I did. So where specifically you're talking about, I don't know, excuse me.
And you would agree that when you're at the front bumper of the car, you can see where Mr. Ellis is, correct?
No, there was, at that point, I mean, there was probably 15, maybe 20 plus officers there. So there was literally, a crowd. It was kind of, if you look at Miss Malang's second video, that's what it looked like very quick.
And you're saying it was like that from right after you stepped out, that there were people blocking?
So from the moment I got up and kind of started to move away and talk to people, within seconds when I looked back and I started, because I remember hearing he's spitting on people, someone get a spit hood, and I looked back and I couldn't even see him at that point. He's kind of swallowed up by everyone standing around and the lights are everywhere.
You were close enough, though, to hear somebody say that he was spitting, correct?
Yes,
You never actually saw Mr. Ellis spitting, did you?
I never saw him spit.
And Mr. Ellis remained on the ground the entire time after the hobbles were on him, correct?
I didn't view him, so I'm not sure.
You never saw him again after you put the hobbles on him?
I did not. Well, I mean, I might have looked through I think at one point I looked through the crowd and saw, parts of him, but no, I didn't. I wasn't viewing him in the manner that you're asking.
And you don't know who said that he was spitting?
I don't.
And you don't know who got the spit hood?
I do now, but I didn't at the time.
And you were aware, were you not, that a spit hood had been put on him, correct?
I heard it asked for.
You heard someone ask for this?
I heard someone ask for it. Yeah, I knew it was coming.
Did you know that it was put on him?
I don't recall if at the time I knew it or not, but I knew it was coming to be put on him.
And you would agree it took a long time for fire to arrive, is that right?
I mean, I don't know specifically how long it took. I know they do the best they can every night. They're very busy in Tacoma.
You don't dispute that it took about 9 minutes for fire to get there?
You have the records, ma'am. I'll trust you.
Well, you've heard the testimony, correct?
Yes,
Does that seem about right?
it's possible.
Did you think it was a long time?
I don't remember independently thinking that.
Now, you didn't perform any kind of first aid on Mr. Ellis?
No.
And you said you ran and spoke to the fire department, to Lieutenant Wilson. Where did you speak to him at?
Behind my vehicle, some distance. So they parked. I don't know. Maybe it was a half a block back, maybe a little bit more, and I just approached them at their rig.
So you approached them before they ever got to Mr. Ellis, is that right?
That's correct.
And you never actually walked up while they were treating Mr. Ellis? Is that your testimony?
Yes, ma'am. I did not.
And was Officer Burbank with you the entire time after you stepped away from Mr. Ellis?
Not the entire time. No, I was alone when I approached fire, and I heard from his statement that he went back eventually and retrieved those handgun magazines, which turned out to be his, and I think his hat maybe. So there was a period there where we were not together.
And do you recall, other than what you read in Officer Burbank's statement, what do you recall about where Officer Burbank was after you stepped away?
I remember at one point we were getting interviewed by Sergeant Lim in front of the vehicle, and then at another point we were in the car together I think that was after fire arrived, but I don't independently recall where he was the entire time.
And you didn't go into the car until after fire had arrived, correct?
I'm not 100%. Yeah, no, that would be correct. Yes, because I was behind the vehicle and approached them, and then I think after that I got into my vehicle.
And when Sergeant Lim was asking you questions about what had happened, you were there, you were talking with Officer Burbank, correct?
When Sergeant Lim was asking me questions,
Yes, when he was asking you guys what
I
happened.
mean, I was talking to Sergeant Lim. Is that what you're asking
You
me?
were both present,
We were both present.
all right. You weren't separated.
No.
So from the time that Mr. Ellis was put into hobbles, he remained on the ground the entire time, correct?
Again, I don't know that, ma'am.
Do you have any reason to believe he wasn't on the ground?
Well, I've heard other testimony that he was continuing.
Speculation, he doesn't say, doesn't know.
You may answer overruled.
I mean, I heard testimony that he was continuing to fight, so I don't know what that looked like because I wasn't viewing it, so I don't want to answer that.
So you're saying if he continued to fight, you never saw it?
That is correct.
You never saw him off the ground, did you?
Not once he was hobbled, I didn't.
And you never removed the handcuffs from him?
No.
And you never removed the hobbles from him?
No, ma'am.
And after Mr. Ellis was in the hobble and the handcuffs, well, once he was in the handcuffs, he never struck you, did he?
No, he did not.
And he never spit at you, did he?
He did not spit at me.
And Mr. Ellis wasn't out in the eastbound lane of traffic, was he?
I don't think so. Maybe not quite that far.
He remained in front of the patrol car, essentially, correct?
I think he did.
And you never saw him wiggling or trying to get himself out into the street, did you?
Oh, yeah. I mean, well, so again, after he was handcuffed, he immediately started to stand up, and that's kind of that motion we're talking about. So his hips going up in the air, he's on his knees, And then as he flattens out, he's getting further out, right? So he's up on his knees, he's going down. And so that's why I'm just holding his legs at that point.
And did he move out into the eastbound lane of traffic?
I don't think we made it into the eastbound lane of traffic.
After Officers Rankin and Ford arrived, Mr. Ellis, from what you saw, never moved out into the lane of traffic, did he?
Again, I couldn't really see him, ma'am, because there was tons of people there by then.
And at the point that you walked away, what officers were there when you claim you walked away?
There was a lot. I remember.
Who do you remember?
I remember 2 county officers, and I remember Sergeant Lim. I remember Ford and Rankin. And then there was other people there, because I remember walking by people, but I don't remember faces. And then once I looked at the CAD, it's like there was so many officers, I don't know.
Is it your testimony that all of those officers were there before you stepped back to your patrol car?
Well, I don't know if they all were there. There was definitely other officers there. Sergeant Lim was there. Messinio and Sanders were there. Ford and Rankin were there for sure. I don't know about who else I could name.
So at the point that you stepped back, you say, after Mr. Ellis was hobbled to your patrol car, Ford, Rankin, Messinio, Sanders, and Lim were there, is that right?
At a minimum.
At a minimum.
At a
There were
minimum.
five other officers present.
Yes, ma'am.
Right there, just a moment. You talked this morning about a case that, an incident that you said informed how you handled Mr. Ellis on this occasion, correct?
That is correct.
And that was an incident at the St. James Apartments, is
Yes,
that right?
yes, ma'am.
And according to your testimony, the individual was in one of the empty apartments, correct?
Correct.
And there had been a woman who had reported a concern about him,
Yes.
something to do with her mail flat?
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes.
And according to you, that individual was about 150 pounds, I think you said. He was a little guy.
He was small, yeah. He was smaller.
And you say that he was whispering to you that he was going to kill you throughout?
Among other creepy things, yes, ma'am.
And you said that you had to put him in an LVNR, is that right?
No, I did not put him in LVNR. No, that's where, see, what I was trying to explain is, that's where I realized that's what has to happen in that situation, because people under that amount of narcotics, they're not making rational decisions. They can't feel pain. They can't feel themselves get tired. So you're just going to injure them repeatedly. So the safest thing for them and for the officer I came to was the LVNR. So that's where I learned that, is what I was saying.
And did you use the LVNR on people who you claimed had excited delirium after that occasion?
So the only 2 people I've ever encountered at this magnitude was the man in that apartment and Mr. Ellis the night of the incident.
And that was in 2017, wasn't it?
I don't recall what the date was.
And you said there that you thought that the individual had excited delirium, correct?
I did.
And you wrote a report about that incident, did you?
Yes, I did.
And do you recall that in the report that you wrote, you never said anything about the individual having excited delirium, did you?
No, it wasn't. I don't think it was pertinent.
You didn't write anything at all about it, did you?
No.
And in fact, you described the individual, you didn't describe any threats by the individual, did you? Did he threaten to kill you?
I don't remember independently my report from back then, but
I can show it to you.
okay.
I could have this marked as Exhibit 77, please. marked as Exhibit 77. You recognize that as the report that you wrote back on October 15th, 2017 about the incident at the St. James Apartments.
Yes, ma'am.
And Officer Officer Burbank was there as well,
He
correct?
was, yes.
And this involved a man by the name of Philemon Jerome Sharp.
Philemon Shark, yes.
And you would agree that the description that you put of him in this report is that he was 6 feet tall and 200 pounds, correct?
Sounds like that's what it is.
You want to look at the report that you wrote? What I gave you?
Can you maybe point me to where in the report that would be?
Sure. Take a look at page 2. Arrestee A1.
I'm sorry, are you looking on the booking form? So you're looking not on the actual written report?
I'm looking at what I've handed you as Exhibit 77.
Okay.
It says page 1 of 12.
Okay.
It's on page 2 of 12.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so like when this stuff goes in, this is like off of a driver's license. This is not, so probably years of drugs, he was not 200 pounds at the
Even though
time.
you listed him as 6 feet tall and 200 pounds, you're saying he was actually only about 150 pounds?
Again, I didn't list him, ma'am. So when you do these official reports, you kind of type in someone's birthday, name, everything, and then they get loaded up as to what the DMV from the state of Washington has them as, but they don't keep up on these guys as they continue to change throughout the years. I mean, I think my license says I'm 200 pounds.
Did you prepare this report?
I did.
And if you take a look at your report, your narrative at page 11, you don't describe Mr. Stark as threatening to kill you, whispering that he was threatening to kill you, do you?
Sorry, give me a second. I need to read this. I said, so I'm just gonna actually read through some of this because there's a lot here. While he was saying this, I noticed, identified a black weapon holster sticking out underneath. Shark's coat at his right hip. It was right after this I noticed Shark became assaulted by standing up, attempting to pull his arms downward. There was a waistline while driving his weight towards us. All the while, Shark was staring at me with the same distant and calm glance and began to whisper to me. I'm sorry. I'll repeat that. It was right after noticing that A1 Shark became assaultive by standing up and attempting to pull his arms downwards towards his waistline while driving them towards us, his weight towards us. All the while, A1 Shark was staring at me with the same distant and calm glance and began to whisper to me.
And he said, is your partner a rookie?
He feels like it.
Correct?
Then he says,
And then you wrote that he said, you know how easily I could hurt you guys, correct?
yeah.
And above that, you wrote that he had reached out, when you had reached out to grab him, he became actively resistant, stating in a distant whisper, no, I don't think so, correct?
Yeah. Yes,
You
ma'am.
don't have anything else in here about threats that he whispered to you that he was gonna kill you, does it?
That's what he's looking for, Ms. Hicks.
No, ma'am, I think this goes back to our original conversation about, there's no need when I write a report to write every single, unless it's pertinent. If we know a timeline's pertinent, then I'll write exactly what's going on based on the timeline. If I know what he says is pertinent, he's already made threats to me, I've already covered that. So to cover everything he said, it just wouldn't be necessary.
And you didn't include anything in this report about Mr. Sharp purportedly having excited delirium, correct?
I don't think I did. tased him. He said, "Oh yeah, that feels good."
You would agree it would be an pertinent fact that you thought this individual had excited delirium, correct?
If we think he's entering a medical emergency, absolutely. So if he starts sweating profusely and going comatose, then yes, this is very dangerous, very quick.
So is it your testimony that even though you say that he had excited delirium, you didn't think it was pertinent at the time?
Yes, there's different stages of it. Yes, ma'am.
I could have just a moment.
Sure.
That's all I have, thank you.
Okay, it's about 3 minutes to 4, so we'll take our break for the day. Ladies and gentlemen, please do not discuss case among yourselves with anyone else. Do not permit anyone to discuss case with you in your presence, and please avoid any reports in the media, social media, or otherwise. Thank you.